I never expected that a quiet evening spent sorting through my dad's old study would flip my world upside down. My name's Avery, and I'm an urban planner. I've always been driven by a sense of purpose, a desire to build and create. But that night, I found something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about my family. I was just trying to tidy up, you know? My mom, Lorraine, had been nagging me for weeks to go through Dad's things. He passed away a few years ago, and we hadn't had the heart to sort through his study until now. As I rummaged through piles of yellowing papers and dusty blueprints, I stumbled upon a rolled-up sheet hidden behind a stack of old architecture magazines. It was a blueprint of a development project I'd never heard of, marked with my dad's unmistakable handwriting. The name on the plan? Everett Heights. The Everetts were a prominent family in town, known for their philanthropy and real estate empire. Nolan, my boyfriend, was part of that family, but we never really talked about his parents' business. I felt a chill run down my spine as I unrolled the blueprint further, revealing a complex urban development plan. It was detailed, ambitious, and completely unfamiliar to me. My heart pounded as I took the blueprint to my mom. I found her in the kitchen, nursing a cup of chamomile tea, her face lined with the kind of worry that never really goes away. I laid the blueprint on the table and watched her expression shift from curiosity to something darker. "Mom, do you know anything about this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Lorraine looked at the blueprint, then at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else I couldn't quite place. "Your father was working on that before he passed," she said softly, her fingers tracing the lines on the paper as if they held memories. "Why didn't you tell me?" I pressed, feeling a surge of frustration. "It was complicated, Avery," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He never finished it. "There were issues with the Everetts?" I asked, my mind racing. Lorraine hesitated, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The Everetts were more than just Nolan's family. They were practically royalty in our town. If they were involved in whatever had derailed my dad's project, I needed to know why. And if they had a hand in his downfall, I needed to know how. Lorraine reached out and touched my arm, a silent plea for caution. "Be careful, Avery. Digging into the past can be dangerous." But I couldn't just let it go. This was my father's work, his legacy. I owed it to him to find out what happened. I nodded, but my mind was already spinning with questions and possibilities. I needed to talk to Nolan to see if he knew anything about this project or his family's involvement. As I left the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something big, something that could change everything. The blueprint felt like a key, and I was determined to unlock whatever secrets it held. Later, as I sat in my room, the blueprint spread out on my bed, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I knew this was the beginning of something, a path that could lead to answers or even more questions. But one thing was certain, I couldn't ignore it. My dad's work deserved justice, and I was going to find it no matter what. I glanced at my phone, debating whether to call Nolan. I needed to know if he was aware of any of this, but I also feared what his reaction might be. Would he stand by me, or would his loyalty to his family come first? The thought gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. I'd deal with that when the time came. For now, I had a blueprint, a mystery, and a determination that burned brighter than ever. I was ready to dig deeper, to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the powerful Everett family. And as I stared at the blueprint, I couldn't help but wonder what else I might find hidden in the shadows of the past. I sat across from Nolan in the dim light of our favorite cafe, the blueprint burning a hole in my bag. I hadn't mentioned it yet, trying to gauge his mood. He was talking about some new project at work, but my mind was miles away, tangled in thoughts of my dad and the Everetts. "Avery, are you okay?" Nolan's voice cut through my thoughts. He looked genuinely concerned, his brow furrowed in that way that always softened my heart. "Yeah, sorry," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my mind." "Is it work?" he asked, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I hesitated, then decided to just rip off the bandage. "It's about my dad. I found something in his study that I think you should see." His expression shifted slightly, curiosity mingled with something else. Was it apprehension? I pulled out the blueprint and laid it between us, watching his reaction closely. "What is this?" he asked, picking it up and scanning the lines and notes. "It's a development plan connected to your family," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. "Everett Heights. My dad was working on it before he died." Nolan's eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition. "I've heard of it," he admitted slowly. "But I thought it was just another one of my mom's projects. Did you know my dad was involved?" I pressed. "No, Avery, I swear." "I had no idea," he replied, his voice earnest. But there was a tension in his shoulders, a stiffness that hadn't been there before. "I need to find out what happened," I said, leaning in. "I think your family knows more than they're letting on." Nolan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Avery, you know how my mom is. She keeps everything close to the chest. But I'll talk to her, see what I can find out." I nodded, grateful but also wary. I knew how tight-knit the Everetts were, how fiercely they protected their own. "Thanks, Nolan. I need answers." As we finished our drinks, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger storm. Nolan's loyalty was torn, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for putting him in this position. But I couldn't ignore the truth, not when it was so close. Later that evening, as I sat with my mom in the living room, I could see the worry etched into her face. "You talked to Nolan?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. "Yeah, I did," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "He's going to ask Margot about the project." Lorraine sighed, her eyes distant. "I just hope you know what you're doing, Avery." The Everetts. They're not easy people to deal with. "I know, Mom. But I can't just let this go." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Sometimes the past is better left buried." I didn't respond, but her words lingered in my mind. I knew she was trying to protect me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than I realized. The next morning, I decided to reach out to Jasper Monroe, an investigative journalist I'd met at a community planning event. He was known for his tenacity and his knack for uncovering hidden truths. If anyone could help me dig deeper, it was him. "Jasper, it's Avery Winslow," I said when he answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need your help with something." "Of course, Avery," he replied, his tone warm and curious. "What's going on?" I explained the situation, the blueprint, and my suspicions about the Everetts. Jasper listened intently, asking questions that made me realize just how little I actually knew. "This sounds big," he said finally. "I'll see what I can find. But Avery, you should be prepared for whatever comes out. The truth isn't always easy." "I know," I replied, a lump forming in my throat. "But I have to do this." As I hung up, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I was stepping into a world of secrets and power plays, and I had no idea what I might uncover. But I was ready to face it, whatever it took. The day wore on, filled with a tension that seemed to seep into everything I did. I couldn't shake the feeling that the blueprint was just the tip of the iceberg. That beneath it lay layers of betrayal and deceit I hadn't even begun to uncover. But I was ready. For my dad, for his legacy, and for the truth that had been buried for too long. Whatever the cost, I was determined to see this through. The cafe buzzed with the low hum of conversations and the clinking of cups. But I barely noticed as Jasper and I pored over the documents he'd managed to dig up. They were spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle, each one revealing a little more of the tangled web that had ensnared my father. "Look at this," Jasper said, pointing to a contract with Margot Everett's signature scrawled at the bottom. "It seems she pressured your dad into abandoning the project, promising investments that never materialized." I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. "So she set him up to fail," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. "And then left him to pick up the pieces." Jasper nodded, his expression grim. "It looks that way. I'm sorry, Avery. This is bigger than I thought." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. My father had been manipulated, his dreams crushed by the very people I was now entangled with. And Nolan, how much did he know? My heart twisted at the thought. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Nolan. He wanted to meet, and I knew I couldn't avoid this confrontation any longer. I needed to know where he stood, even if the truth shattered everything between us. We met at the park, the air crisp and the leaves crunching underfoot. Nolan's face was a mix of concern and determination, his usual easy smile absent. "What's going on, Avery?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with tension. "I found out more about the project," I said, watching his reaction closely. "Margot manipulated my dad into abandoning it. She used him, Nolan." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I talked to my mom. She said it was just business, that your dad wasn't ready for something so big." "That's not true, and you know it," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "She set him up to fail, and it ruined him." Nolan's eyes met mine, conflicted and pained. "Avery, I didn't know. I swear. My family. They keep things from me too. Do you believe me?" I asked, my voice softer now, pleading. He hesitated, and that pause was like a knife to my heart. "I want to, but it's hard. They're my family." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I need you to be on my side, Nolan. I can't do this alone." He reached for my hand, his grip firm but unsure. "I'm here, Avery. I'll help you, but I need to understand more." As we stood there, the distance between us felt both vast and fragile. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult road, but at least Nolan was willing to walk it with me. Later that night, I sat with Jasper again, trying to piece together our next move. "What now?" I asked, feeling the weight of the task ahead. "We need more evidence," Jasper replied, his eyes scanning the documents. "Something that ties Margot directly to the financial ruin." I nodded, determination hardening my resolve. "Whatever it takes, we'll find it." But just as we were about to wrap up, Jasper's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He answered, his face growing serious as he listened. "Okay, thanks for the heads up," he said before hanging up. "What is it?" I asked, sensing another twist. "There's a rumor," Jasper said slowly, "that Margot's planning a new development, something big. She might be using the same tactics she used on your dad." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about my father's past, it was about preventing future harm. Margot was still playing her games, and more people could get hurt. I felt a surge of urgency, a need to stop her before she could ruin more lives. This wasn't just about justice for my dad anymore, it was about protecting others from the same fate. As I left Jasper's office, the cool night air did little to calm the storm inside me. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I was ready to face them. For my father, for the truth, and for the chance to stop Margot before she could do more damage. The stakes had just been raised, and I was more determined than ever to see this through, whatever the cost. As I sat at my desk, staring at the jumble of papers and notes, the weight of everything pressed down on me. My career was on shaky ground, my personal life in turmoil, and the truth seemed more elusive than ever. I needed a break, a moment to breathe, but there was no time for that now. Not when the stakes were so high. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Lorraine, her expression a mix of concern and something else, an urgency I hadn't seen before. "Avery, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm but gentle. I nodded, motioning for her to sit. "What's going on, Mom?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a seriousness that made my heart skip. "There's something I haven't told you. Something about your father." I felt a chill run through me. "What do you mean?" Lorraine hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your father. He knew what Margot was capable of. He suspected she was trying to sabotage him, but he couldn't prove it." "Why didn't he say anything?" I asked, frustration bubbling up. "He wanted to protect you," she replied, her voice breaking slightly. "He thought if he kept quiet, he could handle it on his own." I leaned back, absorbing the revelation. My father had known, and yet he'd chosen silence. It made sense, in a way. He was always trying to shield me from the harsh realities of the world, even at his own expense. Lorraine reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, worn and yellowed with age. He left this for you. I didn't know when the right time was, but I think you need it now. I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter, the familiar scrawl of my father's handwriting bringing a lump to my throat. As I read, his words were both a comfort and a call to action. He spoke of forgiveness, of love, and of finding peace amidst chaos. But he also urged me to be strong, to fight for what was right. "Thank you," I whispered, folding the letter carefully. It was what I needed, a reminder of the man he was and the legacy he left behind. Lorraine smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "He'd be proud of you, Avery. You're doing the right thing." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. But as I sat there, another thought crept in. What if this fight wasn't just about my father? What if it was about preventing others from falling into the same trap? Later, as I met with Jasper, I shared the contents of the letter. He listened intently, nodding and understanding. "This changes things," he said. "It's not just about revenge anymore, is it?" "No," I replied, my voice steady. "It's about justice. For my dad, and for anyone else Margot might hurt." Jasper leaned back, considering. "We need to be smart about this. Margot's powerful, and she won't go down without a fight." I agreed, but there was something else gnawing at me. What if there's more to this? What if Margot's not the only one involved? Jasper's eyes narrowed, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I have a feeling there's more to uncover." As we planned our next steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground was shifting beneath us. The power dynamics were changing, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. That evening, I met Nolan for dinner, hoping to find some solace in his presence. But as we talked, I realized things were more complicated than ever. He was supportive, yes, but there was a distance between us, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Avery, I've been thinking," he said, his fork pausing midair. "What if we're going about this the wrong way?" "What do you mean?" I asked, wary of where this was going. "Maybe there's a way to resolve this without tearing everything apart," he suggested, his eyes searching mine. "A way to find peace without destroying my family." I sighed, understanding his dilemma, but feeling the pull of my own convictions. "I don't want to hurt anyone, Nolan. But I can't ignore what happened." "I know," he replied, reaching for my hand. "I just hope there's a way for both of us to get what we need." As we sat there, the unspoken words hung heavy in the air. We were on the same side, but the path forward was anything but clear. And as much as I wanted to believe in a peaceful resolution, I knew the fight was far from over. The stakes were higher than ever, and the twists and turns of this journey were only just beginning. But with my father's words as my guide, I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that justice was worth fighting for. The gala was in full swing, the room filled with the clinking of glasses and the low hum of polite conversation. I stood at the edge of the crowd, my heart pounding as I scanned the room for Margot. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for, the confrontation I couldn't avoid any longer. I spotted her near the center of the room, surrounded by admirers and hangers-on, her laugh ringing out like a bell. She was the picture of elegance and control, but I knew better. I knew the facade she wore so well. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the crowd, my mind racing with everything I needed to say. As I approached, Margot's eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second, I saw something flicker there, recognition, perhaps even fear. "Avery," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "What a surprise to see you here." "Margot," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement playing at her lips. "Talk? About what?" "About my father," I said, my words cutting through the chatter around us. "And about what you did to him." The smile on her face faltered, replaced by a cool, calculating gaze. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't play games with me," I insisted, my voice rising. "I know about the project, about how you manipulated him." The room seemed to still, the air thick with tension. Margot's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. "You're making quite the scene, Avery. I suggest you think carefully about what you're saying." I could feel the eyes of the crowd on us, the whispers starting to spread. But I didn't care. This was about my father, about the truth that had been buried for too long. Why? I demanded, my voice breaking slightly. Why did you do it? Margot's facade cracked just for a moment. Your father was in over his head, she said, her voice low and sharp. I did what was necessary. Necessary? I echoed, disbelief and anger mixing in my tone. You ruined him. She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. He was a threat to everything I've built. I couldn't let him succeed. The admission hung between us, raw and undeniable. I felt a surge of anger, but also something else, a deep, aching sadness. This was the truth I'd been seeking, but it was more bitter than I'd imagined. Before I could respond, Nolan appeared at my side, his expression a mix of shock and dismay. Avery, what's going on? I'm finding out the truth, I replied, my voice steady but my heart aching. He looked between us, his loyalty torn, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Mom, is it true? Margot hesitated, her gaze flicking to Nolan, and I saw a crack in her armor. It's complicated, Nolan. Complicated? I repeated, my voice rising again. You destroyed my father's life, and you call it complicated? Nolan's face fell, the weight of the revelation settling over him. Avery, I didn't know. I swear. I believe you, I said softly, my anger giving way to exhaustion. But it doesn't change what happened. As the room buzzed with the aftermath of our confrontation, I felt the enormity of the situation pressing down on me. This was bigger than just my father's legacy. It was about justice, about making sure Margot couldn't hurt anyone else. But as I stood there, I realized something else. Revenge wouldn't bring my father back. It wouldn't heal the wounds that had been opened. I needed to find a way forward, a way to honor my father without losing myself in the process. Nolan touched my arm, his expression earnest. Avery, let's figure this out together. There has to be a way. I nodded, grateful for his support, but knowing the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Margot was powerful, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. But with Nolan by my side, I felt a spark of hope. As the night wore on, I knew I was at a crossroads. The confrontation had been a turning point, forcing me to reevaluate my goals and my understanding of justice. It was time to fight for what was right, but also to find peace within myself. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, armed with the truth and the determination to see it through. Whatever it took, I would make sure my father's legacy lived on and that Margot's reign of manipulation came to an end. The days following the gala were a blur of tension and uncertainty. The confrontation with Margot had left me feeling raw and exposed, and the fallout was more than I'd anticipated. Rumors swirled through the town, whispers of scandal and betrayal that seemed to follow me everywhere I went. I sat in Jasper's cluttered office, the weight of everything pressing down on me. He was flipping through a folder, his brow furrowed in concentration. We've got a problem, he said finally, looking up with a grim expression. What now? I asked, bracing myself for more bad news. Margot's moving fast, Jasper replied, handing me a document. She's shifting assets, covering her tracks. If we don't act soon, we might lose our chance to prove anything. I felt a cold knot of fear settle in my stomach. Margot was slipping through our fingers, and with her, the chance to bring justice for my father. What can we do? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. We need more evidence, Jasper said, his tone urgent. Something concrete that ties her to the sabotage. I nodded, trying to muster the energy to keep fighting. But the truth was, I was exhausted. My career was in jeopardy, my relationship with Nolan strained, and the path forward seemed more uncertain than ever. As I left Jasper's office, my phone buzzed with a message from Nolan. He wanted to meet, and I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. We needed to talk, to figure out where we stood in the midst of this chaos. We met at the park, the same place where we'd had so many conversations before. But this time, the air was heavy with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Avery, I've been thinking, Nolan began, his voice tentative, about everything that's happened. Me too, I replied, my heart aching with the weight of what I needed to say. He looked at me, his eyes searching. I want to help, but I'm not sure how. My family, they're not going to stop. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I can't give up, Nolan. I have to see this through. He nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. I'm with you, Avery. But this is tearing us apart. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing how much I was asking of him. I don't want to lose you, I admitted, my voice breaking. We'll figure it out, he said, but there was an uncertainty in his tone that mirrored my own fears. As we parted ways, I felt more alone than ever. The fight for justice had consumed everything, and I was starting to wonder if it was worth the cost. Back at home, I found Lorraine waiting for me, her expression worried. Avery, you look exhausted, she said, reaching out to touch my arm. I'm fine, Mom, I replied, though I knew it was far from the truth. She sighed, her eyes filled with concern. You can't do this alone. Let me help. I shook my head, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me. I don't know how to fix this, I admitted, my voice barely holding steady. Lorraine pulled me into a hug, her warmth a small comfort against the storm raging inside me. We'll find a way, she said softly. Your father would want you to be happy, Avery, not consumed by this. Her words lingered in my mind, a reminder of what truly mattered. But as much as I wanted to let go, to find peace, the thought of walking away felt like a betrayal of everything my father had stood for. The next day, as I sat in my office, trying to focus on work, my phone buzzed with a call from Jasper. Avery, you need to see this, he said, urgency in his voice. I rushed to his office, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. Jasper met me at the door, a file in hand. We've got a lead, he said, his eyes bright with determination. What is it? I asked, feeling a flicker of hope. There's a new witness, Jasper explained. Someone who worked with Margot and might have evidence of her involvement. The news was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the midst of despair. But as we delved into the details, I realized the risk involved. This witness was taking a huge gamble, and if Margot found out, the consequences could be dire. As I left Jasper's office, the weight of the decision settled over me. The path to justice was fraught with danger, but it was also the only way forward. I had to decide if I was willing to take the risk, to push forward despite the odds stacked against me. The stakes had never been higher, and the pressure was mounting. But with the promise of new evidence, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was at my lowest point, but from here, the only way to go was up. Whatever it took, I would fight for the truth, for my father, and for the chance to finally bring Margot to justice. The tension in Franklin Everett's study was palpable, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken words. I stood across from him, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on me. This was it, the moment everything had been leading to, the confrontation that would determine the future of my father's legacy. Franklin sat behind his desk, his expression a mix of regret and resolve. Avery, he began, his voice steady but tinged with something deeper. I owe you an apology. I nodded, my heart pounding. I need to know the truth, Franklin. All of it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Margot and I. We made mistakes. We were ambitious, too focused on what we could gain, and we lost sight of what really mattered. You destroyed my father's dream, I said, my voice firm but laced with emotion. You ruined his life. Franklin's eyes met mine, filled with a sorrow that seemed genuine. I know, and I've lived with that guilt every day. But I want to make it right if you'll let me. I hesitated, the offer unexpected but not unwelcome. How? I can help you restore his project, Franklin replied, leaning forward. I have contacts, resources. We can bring his vision to life. The offer hung between us, a lifeline I hadn't anticipated. But as much as I wanted to accept, there was still the question of Margot, her actions, and the impact they'd had on so many lives. What about Margot? I asked, my voice steady. She can't keep getting away with this. Franklin nodded, understanding. I've spoken to her. She's agreed to step back, to let us move forward without interference. I felt a flicker of hope, but also skepticism. And you trust her? I don't know, Franklin admitted, his voice heavy. But I'm willing to try. For you, for your father, and for Nolan. The mention of Nolan brought a fresh wave of emotion. He was caught in the middle, torn between his family and the truth. But this was bigger than us, bigger than the past. It was about justice, about doing what was right. As I considered Franklin's offer, the door swung open and Margot entered, her expression unreadable. "Avery," she said, her voice cool but not unkind. "I hear you've been busy." I straightened, meeting her gaze head-on. "I'm not going to let you get away with what you did." She paused, her eyes flicking to Franklin before returning to me. "I've made mistakes," she admitted, surprising me with her candor. "But I want to make amends." "Why now?" I challenged, my skepticism clear. "Because I've seen what this has done to my family," Margot replied, her voice softer. "To Nolan, to Franklin. I don't want to lose them." The admission was unexpected, a crack in the armor she'd worn for so long. But as much as I wanted to believe her, I knew actions spoke louder than words. "I need proof," I said, my voice firm. "Proof that you're serious about this." Margot nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "You'll have it. Whatever you need to move forward, I'll provide." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over us. This was it, the resolution I hadn't dared to hope for, the chance to honor my father's legacy and find peace. As I left the study, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in weeks. The path forward was still uncertain, but with Franklin's support and Margot's promise, I was ready to take the next steps. Outside, I found Nolan waiting, his expression a mix of hope and concern. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice tentative. "It's a start," I replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "Franklin's going to help. And Margot. She's agreed to back off." Nolan nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I'm glad. I know it's been hard, but I'm proud of you, Avery." I smiled, the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to lift. "Thank you, Nolan, for everything." As we stood together, the core themes of my journey, justice, revenge, and forgiveness, came full circle. I realized that true justice wasn't about retribution, but about healing, about finding a way to move forward without losing myself in the process. With the promise of a new beginning, I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it. For my father, for myself, and for the future we could build together. The morning air was crisp as I stood at the site of my father's long-dormant project, now buzzing with new life and possibility. Construction workers moved with purpose, their energy a testament to the fresh start we were building. Franklin had kept his promise, and together we were breathing life back into my father's dream. I watched as the foundation took shape, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. This was more than just a project. It was a symbol of resilience, of the legacy my father had left behind. And it was a testament to the power of truth and redemption. Nolan joined me, his presence a comforting anchor. "It's really happening," he said, his voice filled with quiet awe. I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. "It is. And I couldn't have done it without you." He smiled, slipping his hand into mine. "I'm proud of you, Avery. You never gave up." As we stood together, I realized how far we'd come. Our relationship had been tested, but we'd emerged stronger, bound by a shared commitment to justice and love. A few days later, we gathered at a small ceremony to commemorate the project's revival. Lorraine was there, her eyes shining with pride. Jasper, too, stood by my side, his role in uncovering the truth pivotal to our success. As the ceremony concluded, Margot approached me, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. "Avery," she began, her voice sincere. "I want to thank you for everything." I met her gaze, searching for any trace of insincerity but finding none. "I didn't do it for you," I replied, my tone gentle but firm. "But I'm glad you're here." She nodded, accepting the truth of my words. "I'm trying to change. For Nolan, for Franklin. I hope one day you can see that." I didn't respond immediately, allowing the moment to settle. Her journey was her own, and while I couldn't forget the past, I could choose to let go of the anger that had once consumed me. As the crowd began to disperse, Lorraine pulled me aside, handing me a small envelope. "I found this in your father's things," she said, her voice filled with emotion. I opened it, my breath catching as I recognized my father's handwriting. The letter was a simple message of love and forgiveness, urging me to find peace in my own heart and to trust in the power of redemption. It was the final piece I needed, a reminder that my father had always believed in the goodness of people, even those who had wronged him. And in that moment, I understood that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, but rather freeing myself from the burden of the past. Later, as I walked through the site, I felt a sense of closure. My father's legacy was secure, and with it, a future that honored his vision and values. I knew there would still be challenges, but I was ready to face them, armed with the lessons I'd learned. As I turned to leave, a thought lingered in my mind, a question that would remain unanswered. Had Margot truly changed, or was this just another chapter in her complex narrative? It was a question that might never be resolved, but it no longer held power over me. In the end, the journey had been about more than just justice or revenge. It had been about finding my own path, about understanding the complexities of human nature, and about choosing love and forgiveness over bitterness. As I walked away from the site, hand in hand with Nolan, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was open, filled with possibilities, and I was ready to embrace it with an open heart and a renewed sense of purpose. Sense of purpose. Sense of purpose. Sense of purpose. Sense of